This program is provided by Universal Genesis.
Welcome back to the Deep Dive. Today, we are putting the robes back on, figuratively speaking, and stepping back into the arena for what might be the most lopsided match in intellectual history. We are back with part 2 of The Philosopher's Sorting Hat.
It really is a spectator sport. And if you tuned in for part 1, you saw the ancient Greeks really battling it out. It was a close game.
Very close.
But today, we are marching straight into the Middle Ages. And I have to warn you, the rules of the game, they change completely.
I love this concept. But before we get into the heavy hitters, and we have some massive names today like Augustine and Aquinas, let's just quickly reset the ground rules for anyone jumping in fresh.
Good idea.
We aren't sorting these historical figures based on, how smart they were or who had the best beard. We have a very specific referee right now.
Exactly. Our referee is the historian Johann Jakob Brücker, and he wrote this massive comprehensive history of philosophy back in the 18th century. And when he looked back at history, he sorted every thinker using essentially one single question.
And what's that question?
He asks, is this person trying to explain nature, the mechanisms, the causes, the physical world, or are they telling a story about meaning?
So we have Team Reason, which is looking down at the earth asking, how does this work?
Right.
And Team Story, looking up at the heavens asking, what does this all mean?
Precisely. Team Reason is mechanisms. Team Story is narratives, theology, purpose. And spoiler alert for today's deep dive, if you are rooting for Team Reason, you might want to grab a comfort blanket.
Oh, no.
This is going to be a rough millennium for your team.
1,000 years is a long time to be on a losing streak.
It is a total blowout. I mean, we are moving from the crumbling Roman Empire into the Middle Ages, and the scoreboard is going to look incredibly one-sided. But, and this is why you have to stick around, there's a massive twist in the final quarter.
Okay.
The underdog survives.
I do love a comeback. Okay, let's set the scene. The classical world is fading. The Roman Empire is struggling. We are entering what historians call late antiquity. Who's the first contender stepping up to the sorting hat?
First up, from the 3rd century, we have Plotinus. Now, you have to picture this. Rome is chaotic. Emperors are being assassinated left and right. The economy is shaky. And here's Plotinus, a private philosophy teacher, just gathering a circle of elites to talk about reality.
Okay, so he's the intellectual escaping the chaos. Where does Brücker put him?
Firmly in Team Story. And this is really where the shift happens. You see, Plotinus looked at the physical world, the trees, the bodies, the stars, and he basically said, this isn't the real show. He wasn't interested in dissecting a frog to see how it worked. He believed that the entire world flowed out from the divine source he called the One.
The One. That sounds very abstract. Is that like a personal god?
Not exactly. Imagine a fountain that just never, ever runs dry. The water flows out from the source. But the water isn't independent, right? It's just an expression of that source.
Okay, I'm with you.
For Plotinus, the physical world is just that overflowing water. It's an emanation. So if you want to understand reality, you don't study the water puddles on the ground. You look upstream. You look at the source.
I see. So he's not investigating nature. He is mapping out the meaning structure of the universe. He's telling a story about where we came from, not explaining the mechanics of how we function.
That's it, exactly. And this marks the beginning of the great theological turn. Philosophy stops being about curiosity regarding the physical world, which, remember, Aristotle loved, and it starts being about the architecture of the divine. It becomes vertical, not horizontal.
Okay, so Plotinus is captain of Team Story for this era. Who's next?
Next, we have his student, Porphyry, who lived in the 3rd and 4th centuries. You can kind of think of him as the product manager for this new way of thinking.
The product manager.
Well, Plotinus was very mystical, kind of hard to follow. Porphyry took those ideas and organized them into a rigorous system. But here is the key for our sorting hat. He turned philosophy into a life manual.
Like a self-help book.
A salvation book. He wasn't asking, why does fire burn? Or how do tides work? He was asking, how do we save our souls using these mental exercises? He took Plato's ideas and turned them into a religion. So without a doubt, he goes to Team Story.
It really feels like we're seeing a trend where philosophy is becoming a tool for something else. It's not just thinking for thinking's sake anymore. It has a job to do.
Which is saving your soul.
Right.
That's a great observation. And it leads us perfectly to one of the most tragic figures in our lineup. Boethius in the 6th century.
Boethius. I know the name, but refresh my memory.
He was a high-ranking bureaucrat, an intellectual in the West, working for the Ostrogothic King Theodoric. I mean, he had it all: wealth, power, intellect. But then He gets accused of treason, he's thrown into prison, and he knows he's going to be executed.
That is high stakes.
It's the ultimate pressure test.
Yeah.
And in that darkness, waiting for a brutal death, he writes his masterpiece, The Consolation of Philosophy.
Consolation. That's a very telling title.
Exactly. For Boethius, sitting in that cell, philosophy wasn't about understanding how the planets move or why plants grow. It was therapy. It was a meaning device.
Of course.
Its whole purpose was to support the soul, to heal the mind, to help you make sense of suffering.
I can see that. If I'm sitting in a cell on death row, I really don't care about the atomic structure of the bars. I care about why this is happening to me and how I can find peace.
Precisely. He uses reason, he uses logic, but he uses them to construct a narrative that says, despite this pain, the universe is just. So Boethius is absolutely team story. He solidifies the idea that the job of a thinker is to provide emotional and spiritual scaffolding, not scientific explanation.
Okay, so late antiquity is a clean sweep for team story so far. Now we move into the early Middle Ages. The Roman Empire has officially collapsed in the West, and I feel like we have a giant waiting in the wings.
We do. The 4th and 5th century. Augustine. St.
Oh,
Augustine.
they're heavyweight.
For Brucker and for our sorting hat, Augustine is the MVP for team story. If Plotinus started the game, Augustine. He dunked the ball and shattered the backboard.
Wow, why is he so pivotal?
Because he takes the narrative approach and applies it to history itself.
Uh,
You have to understand the context. Rome had just been sacked by the Visigoths. The Eternal City was burning. People were terrified. They thought the world was ending.
it must have felt like the apocalypse.
It did. And Augustine steps in and writes the City of God. And he basically says, yes, the world is confused. It is chaotic. Empires rise and fall. But there's a script.
A script?
He argued that history isn't just random stuff happening. It has a plot, a beginning, a middle, and an end. He provided this massive theological framework that gave meaning to history, to suffering, to everything.
So before this, history might have just been one damn thing after another. Augustine turns it into a story with a director.
Correct. The focus shifts entirely to the divine narrative. You don't look at a storm and ask about low-pressure systems. You look at the storm and ask where it fits in the drama of salvation. He is emphatically team story, and honestly, this mindset dominates Europe for the next 800 years.
It's hard to overstate how comforting that must have been, though, to know there's a plan when the world is burning down around you.
Absolutely. It probably saved Western civilization from despair. But from the perspective of our sorting hat, the investigation of nature, it hits the pause button. And then, to cap off this era, we have a mysterious figure known as Pseudo-Dionysius in the 5th or 6th century.
Pseudo-Dionysius. Sounds like a spy alias.
He was an anonymous theologian who claimed to be a figure from the Bible, but he was actually writing centuries later. But his impact was huge because he took team story to its logical extreme. He argued that God cannot be explained at all.
Wait, if you can't explain God, what do you talk about?
You don't. You experience him as darkness, as silence. He believed that rationality, our ability to think and categorize and define, basically has to leave the building.
So rationality is actually a barrier.
Yes. He said you can't think your way to the truth. You have to feel your way through symbolism and mysticism. It's called negative theology. You can only say what God is not.
That sounds like a red card for Team Reason.
It is. Team Reason isn't just losing, they've been ejected from the stadium. Symbolism and mysticism take over completely.
So we enter the High Middle Ages. The Dark Ages are passing. Universities are starting to pop up in places like Paris and Oxford. Does Team Reason finally get off the bench?
Well, yes and no. Logic returns.
Huh.
The thinkers of this time, we call them the scholastics, were obsessed with logic. They were incredibly sharp. But logic had a new job description.
What's the job?
Let's look at Anselm in the 11th century, Archbishop of Canterbury. He didn't use logic to figure out how gravity works. He used logic to prove that God exists.
Is this the famous ontological argument?
That's the one. And it's a brain twister, so stay with me.
Yeah.
Anselm argues that God is that than which nothing greater can be conceived.
Okay, the greatest imaginable thing. I get that.
Right. Now, Anselm asks, is it greater to exist only in the mind or to exist in reality?
Well, obviously it's greater to exist in reality. A real pile of gold is better than an imaginary one.
Exactly. So if God is the greatest thing conceivable, he must exist in reality. Because if he only existed in your mind, he wouldn't be the greatest thing conceivable.
My brain hurts. That's slick.
It's incredibly slick. It's pure, rigorous logic. But notice what he's doing. He isn't looking at the world. He isn't gathering data. He is closing his eyes and using logic to justify what he already believes.
How?
Faith comes first. Logic is just the face it wears.
So it's like Team Reason was hired as a high-priced lawyer for Team Story.
That's a perfect analogy. Logic serves the story. And this continues with Abelard in the 12th century. He was a university teacher in Paris, a total superstar, and a bit of a rebel.
I've heard of him. He's the one with the tragic love affair, right? Eloise and Abelard?
That's him, yes. But philosophically, he was a disruptor. He wrote a book called Sic et non, Yes and No. He took quotes from the church fathers that contradicted each other and just placed them side by side. He forced students to use reason to resolve the contradictions.
That sounds dangerous for the 12th century. Questioning authority.
It was very risky. But, and this is why he is still Team Story, his ultimate goal was still the consistency of faith. He wasn't trying to tear down the story. He was trying to make the story bulletproof using reason. So Abelard, despite his rebellious streak, still gets sorted into Team Story.
Okay, so we are more than halfway through the Middle Ages. The score is basically 8-0. Team Story is just dominating. The physical world, nature itself, seems to have been totally ignored as a subject of study.
It looks that way.
Yeah.
But now we arrive at the 13th century, and we hit what I like to call the glitch in the matrix.
Finally, who is our disruptor?
Albertus Magnus. Albert the Great.
Sounds impressive. Who was he?
He was a Dominican friar and a bishop, so by all accounts, a very religious man. But Albertus Magnus had a hobby. He liked to look at stuff.
Look at stuff.
He studied plants, he tracked the migration of birds, he classified minerals, and he did something that hadn't been done in centuries. He established a rule for himself. He said, in natural science, do not bring in God's miracles.
Wow. That seems like a small sentence, but a huge leap.
It's massive. He essentially said, if I am studying why this plant has thorns or why this rock is heavy, I have to explain it using natural causes.
Yeah.
I can't just say God did it and move on.
That is the scientific method peeking through.
There's a wonderful quote about him. He was a monk, but in the moment he was looking at nature, he was not a priest.
That gave me chills. It's like he carved out a separate room in his brain.
He did. He acknowledged God as the final cause, the ultimate reason the universe exists, but he kept theology out of the mechanics. He carved out a safe space for Team Reason to actually do its work.
So Albertus Magnus is our first real point on the board for Team Reason.
Specifically regarding nature, yes, he is the twist. But the Empire strikes back. Immediately.
Of course it does. Who steps up?
Albertus had a student, a quiet lumbering stool they used to call the dumb ox. But history knows him as Thomas Aquinas.
The heavyweight champion of medieval philosophy.
Aquinas is the great synthesizer. He saw what Albertus did, bringing reason and nature back into the picture. And he saw the massive power of the church and the story. And he realized that if these two things kept going separately, they would fight. So he decided to merge them.
How did he do that?
He reconciled reason and faith. He said, yes, use logic. Yes, study nature. These things are good because they're gifts from God. But he built a system where ultimately everything represents a step on a ladder. And where does the ladder lead?
Back to God.
Exactly. Everything is collected back into meaning. Aquinas created the complete diversion of the medieval worldview. It's the final edit. Every fact about a frog or a star, every logical deduction, it all eventually points back to the divine narrative.
So he allows Team Reason to play, but Team Story owns the stadium, the ball, and the concession stand.
Spot on. So despite his brilliance and logic, Brucker sorts him into Team Story because the goal is still theology.
So Team Story wins the era. They just absorb the opposition. It feels like the game is over.
It seemed that way. But cracks were forming. And that brings us to the late Middle Ages and the final figure on our list, the man who signals the fracture.
William of Ockham, 14th century.
William of Ockham. You probably know him for his razor.
Occam's razor. The simplest explanation is usually the right one.
That's the bumper sticker version. The real philosophical move Occam made was much more aggressive. It's called nominalism.
Nominalism. Break that down for us.
Okay, think about the word humanity. Is humanity a real thing that exists out there in the universe? Or is it just a label we use to describe a bunch of individual humans?
Hi, I guess it's just a label.
Then you are a nominalist. But in the Middle Ages, most people like Aquinas thought humanity was real. They thought these universals were the connections between us and God's mind.
And Occam disagreed.
Violently. He said, universals aren't real. Only individual things are real. This person, that rock, that star. And this is where the razor comes in. He used it to cut the invisible strings that the theologians had attached to everything.
He's shaving off the...
He is. He wanted to shave off the complex layers of meaning to get to the raw facts.
Yeah.
He basically said, you cannot prove God with logic. You cannot prove the soul with reason. Those things are for faith only.
Wait, that sounds like he's defending faith, but he's kicking religion out of the science lab.
Exactly. He separates them. He says, if you want to talk about God, go to church and have faith. If you want to talk about the world, look at the evidence. He broke the synthesis that Aquinas built.
And that sounds like a very distinct point for team reason.
It is. Occam is the signal that philosophy is beginning to detach from theology. He is the bridge to the modern scientific mind. He made it okay to look at a rock and just see a rock, not a divine message.
So let's look at the scoreboard as we wrap up the Middle Ages.
It was a blowout. The meaning storyline dominated almost the entire millennium. From Platine to Aquinas, the goal of thinking was to weave a narrative about God and the soul. The reason-nature line was pushed to the absolute fringes.
But, and this is the key takeaway, right? It didn't die.
It did not die. That is the survival story. It survived through that glitch with Albertus Magnus. It survived in the logic games of the universities. And it reemerged, sharp and dangerous, with Occam.
It's fascinating to think about how fragile that thread was. There were centuries where asking, how does this mechanism work, was considered almost irrelevant compared to, what does this mean?
And that leads us to a provocative thought for today. We live in a world that is now dominated by Occam's victory. We live in the world of team reason. We demand mechanisms, proof, and data for everything.
We do. If I ask a question, I want a scientific answer. I want the how.
But look around at our culture. We have all the mechanisms. We know how the atom splits. We know how the brain fires neurons. But people are starving for meaning. We have all the how, but we often feel like we've lost the why.
So in a way, the teams have flipped. We have too much mechanism and not enough story.
Exactly. In the Middle Ages, the radical, dangerous act was to be the person asking, but how does it actually work? Today, maybe the radical act is to be the person stopping to ask, but what does it actually mean?
Are we seeing the return of team story? That is something to chew on.
It certainly is. The pendulum always swings back.
That wraps up our deep dive into the Middle Ages. We've survived the Sorting Hat, but next time we hit the modern era. Descartes, Hume, Kant.
And let me tell you, the gloves come off. It's going to be a street fight.
Can't wait. Thanks for listening. Stay curious.
This program is provided by Universal Genesis.